Good morning. And anyone not here, well, it's no point talking to them, but they obviously didn't listen to the time. How often have you read the Gospels and the account of the crucifixion? Lots. Many times. Well, I want to ask you this morning, do you know how things work? Let's leave off computers because none of us know how those work. But at school, they tried to teach me about electricity. And they said, to explain it, the electrons flow down the wire like water down a hose. And I wanted to know why, if I squeeze a bend into the wire, doesn't the light go out? So I don't know about electricity. Then we come to, anyone know how a steam train works? Well, I had only found out when I was about 40, because my son got interested in trains when he was little, because we lived up by the booms in Kenilworth. And I had to find out, how does a steam train work? I know they shovel coal in and there's a fire and there's all smoke comes out, but how does it work? So I had to go and find all these exploded diagrams and so on. And then there's a nice joke, if you're into the Calvin and Hobbes comics. Calvin says to his father, how does a carburetor work? And his dad says, it's a secret, I'm not allowed to tell you. I still don't know how a carburetor really works. But we're happy to use these things, lights, computers, steam engines if you go on one of these excursions, all sorts of things, and you don't know how they work. Has anyone ever looked inside a piano? There's all sorts of wires and little things that move and hammer on the wires. And if you just look at it, you can't see that. So you don't know how it works. But you're happy to use it. And I believe the same is true for the gospel very often. We believe and we're saved, but we don't know how it actually works. What's the components that make this thing happen? That was me for many years. I was saved. When I was 15, I prayed the sinner's prayer at school. Started going to church. I knew there was a change in my life, but I couldn't have told you how everything fitted together and why did this happen. Why did it need to happen even? I didn't know. And I couldn't have explained it to anyone. And Albert Einstein said, if you can't explain something simply, then you don't really understand it. We're very familiar with the passages in the Gospels. And incidentally, you know, gospel means good news. So it's the good news about Jesus. And it's a familiar story. We hear it year after year, especially at Easter, but sometimes at other times. But how does it work? How does God actually save people from their sin? Why did Jesus have to die? You see, salvation's not just one single thing. It's several interlocking things that fit together to make it complete. You have to have all of them in place to make them work. Now, I'm going to read from the Old Testament where the death of Jesus was predicted, in detail, I might add. And you'd think they would have known this, and when Good Friday happened, people would have realized this is the prediction, but they seem not to. But now remember the writer, Isaiah, and the people around him at the time who read it or heard it read, had never heard the gospel. The four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, hadn't been written yet, so they didn't have this description of what had happened. But it was a prediction of what was going to happen on Good Friday 2,000 and something years ago. It gave the Jewish people a prediction of what was going to happen and also told them why and how. So let's look in our Bibles, Isaiah chapter 53. And Isaiah writes this, who has believed what they heard from us? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a young plant and like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed, and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. And as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off out of the land of the living, stricken for the transgression of my people? And they made his grave with the wicked, and with a rich man in his death, although he had done no violence, and there's no deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him. He has put him to grief. When his soul makes an offering for sin, he shall see his offspring. He shall prolong his days. The will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. Out of the anguish of his soul he shall see and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the many, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul to death, and was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he bore the sin of many, and makes intercession for the transgressors. First of all, why is the gospel necessary at all? Why did Jesus bother? It makes a good story, it makes a good film if you watch The Passion of the Christ and some of the other movies. But why bother? What was it about? What's it good for? Well, Isaiah here gives us reason in various places. Verse 5, he is pierced for our transgressions. He is crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. You have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. And then in verse 10, his soul makes an offering for guilt. And further down, he shall bear their iniquities. Verse 12, he is numbered with the transgressors and makes intercession for the transgressors. Now, these are important words. They're in Hebrew, because Isaiah was writing to Hebrews. And 4 times he uses the word transgressions. Do you know what transgressions are? You know, the robot changes ahead of you and you put your foot down to get through before everyone else starts moving. That's a transgression. You broke the law. In Hebrew, it means a rebellion. It means a breach of relationship. It also means a rejection of allegiance. So when one minor king had a covenant with another king and he broke that allegiance, that would be a transgression, and something would come down on his head. Iniquities. In Hebrew, it implies crooked behavior, something like a politician. I hope it's not recording. A twistedness, something away from what is true, a perversion even. And then sin. In Hebrew, guiltiness, a legal judgment of guilt. Or it implies a missing, a falling short, not living up to the required standard. And what this is about being ungodly, being unlike God, not wanting to know God, not wanting to be anything like God or with God, live without any reference to God, falling into wicked thinking and behavior, twistedness, crookedness, perversion, treachery. All of these have a result. Right in the beginning, in Genesis, the first humans, God warned them. To disobey him would mean they would die. The day you eat of this fruit, you will surely die. And as we know the story, they ate of the fruit. They didn't drop dead right away, but there was an outcome. They were now cut off from God. They didn't even want to know him. Remember when he came into the garden, they hid. We didn't want you to see us. We realized we're naked. So they didn't die right away, but it was a certain outcome. They would die spiritually. They wouldn't live with God forever. And so there's good reasons for needing the gospel, especially since everything you see around you that is bad and horrible is sin. And it needs to be dealt with one way or another. But we might ask, what's that got to do with me? I mean, we're all pretty good people, right? I'm good. I've never killed anyone. I actually tried a couple of times, but firstly, my brother ran faster than I did. And then when I was in the army, I couldn't actually see who I was shooting at. But I've never done all these bad things that other people have done. I'm not as bad as other people, right? Well, actually, yes, you are. Yes, you and I are as bad as everyone else. We tend to compare ourselves down, right? I'm not as bad as these government people who steal money and are so corrupt. I'm not as bad as the gangsters out in Mitchell's Plain who deal in drugs and kill people. We're always comparing ourselves down. We don't compare ourselves up because we don't look so good then, right? Are you as good as one of the missionaries of the past? Or are you as good as Elder Paul? I can say that because he's not here. He's in George this weekend. Don't compare yourself to me, please, please, please. But are you perfect? Verse 10 says this, all we, like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way. And all means each and every person. There's no exceptions. There's not a single human alive can say, well, I'm not the bad guy. I'm one of the, I'm the good one. Everyone except me. No one can say that. And astray means staggering, getting lost, being misled. And each means every single person, no exceptions, every single human being. And our own way means that every single person, with no exceptions, wanders off, does exactly what they like, without reference to God, whenever they want. And now you might like the idea, being totally independent, not having God direct your paths. Trouble is, there's 8 billion other people thinking the same thing. And that's when you clash. To go back to the robot, you put your foot down to get through, and the other guy jumps the signal, and you meet in the middle. You can see by now that each person is in real trouble, even if they don't know it. Each and every human being is in dead trouble. It's a bit like being in the sea. And this has happened to me. You're out there having fun. I was snorkeling, and I looked up, and the land was quite far away. And I was in a current. Now, when you're in something like that, it doesn't matter how you struggle, that thing is more powerful than you, and you're just getting further and further out, carrying you away from land. And when you realize this, you also realize there's nothing you can do about it. So what can be done? We're all in dead trouble. We've all rejected God. What can we do? Well, part of the problem is that God is judge over the earth. Now, I've never had to face a judge, fortunately. Of all the things I've done that are wrong, none of them has got me into court. But some people have to face a judge, and the judge decides what is right and wrong. He interprets the law. And God is judge over the earth, and he decides what sin is or wrongdoing, not you. Not even if you think you've done the right thing. He's the one who decides it. Pleading that you didn't know doesn't work, because deep down, yes, everybody does know what's right. That's called a conscience. You do something wrong, and there's something in you that says, you shouldn't have done that. That's your conscience. People would like that if God just overlooked it. You know, you do something and God says, never mind. You'd love that because you don't have any consequences coming, right? You get off, no problem. But that isn't how justice works. You'd like that for yourself. But what about the person who sins against you? What about the person who kills your mother? Should they just get off? Think of someone committing some great crime. I was thinking of the young lady who was murdered there at Takai a few years ago. And they caught the guys. And everyone was happy, and they said, nail them into jail. And they did. But what would have happened if these guys, I think there's 4 of them, if they'd said to the judge, look, we've never done anything like this before, and we're really, really sorry. We realize it was a bad thing to do, but we'll never do it again. And the judge says, okay, I'll take your word for it. You're free to go. They'd be lynched outside the court, and so would the judge, actually. We don't need judges like that. But we're in a worse condition. We're going our own way without regard to God, doing whatever we like, and everyone else is as well. And in actual fact, what this means is the human race is at war with God. You're actually at war with God. You're a bunch, not you particularly, I'm talking about humans generally, a bunch of rebels refusing to accept the authority of God. And yet one day, we all end up facing the judge. What can we do? How can we pay something that can't be paid? Someone has to pay. What if when you're up in court, you can get someone to take your place and your punishment? We've all been to school. Does anyone remember Tom Sawyer? You should read it if you haven't. Tom Sawyer is a boy in Mississippi in America, and he's really sweet on a girl in his class, Becky Thatcher. And one day he catches her reading the teacher's biology book, and they're looking at pictures they shouldn't have, and she gets a fright and tears the page. And they put the book back, and then the teacher, they're all in class, and the teacher has them down, and they're busy working, and he opens his book and he finds a torn page. And he says, who tore this book? And he goes one by one, did you? And he gets to Becky Thatcher. Rebecca Thatcher, did you tear this book? And she's doesn't want to talk, and her lips trembling. And Tom Sawyer jumps up and says, I done it. And in those days, kids got whacked at school, and he took the punishment, and she got off. That's what's happened. And we call that, big term, substitutionary atonement. Someone took the place and took the punishment. Someone willing to take the place and the punishment of another. And it's unfair, isn't it? It's very unfair. Atonement relies on an unfair substitution. Someone who didn't deserve punishment taking the punishment for someone who deserved the absolute worst. Now back to Isaiah, verse 5. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. Verse 6. The Lord laid on him the iniquity of us all. Verse 12, he poured out his soul to death and was numbered with the transgressors, yet he bore the sin of many. What happens with the gospel is this. You've got a debt to pay. Jesus used the comparison of someone owing money. And if you translate the biblical money into modern terms, this guy owed millions. He could work flat out all his life and he still wouldn't be paying the debt. And it was forgiven. But there's a staggering penalty to pay that you can't even pay. If we were to be punished for a sin by being killed, which is what happened, there's still a whole lot of other sins that aren't paid for. You cannot pay the penalty, so someone else does. Jesus pays it. He's pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. His chastisement brings us peace with God, and he bears the sin of many. So let's sum it up so far. We humans are in trouble because we're at war with a holy God. We offended him. Don't think God just glosses stuff over. He's really offended by human sin. Our hearts lead us astray, and we're iniquitous. Someone said, the heart of the problem is the problem of the heart. It all starts in the human heart, and we've all got this bent to do the wrong thing in our hearts. We're dying physically while we're already dead spiritually. We can't do a thing to help ourselves. We're going to have to face the judge, but someone can take our place and take our punishment, and the judge will then accept that justice has been done. He's not laughing it off, not just saying, oh, well, it doesn't really matter, I'll just forgive you. Justice is done because someone has been punished. And Jesus was arrested, tormented, crucified. All of his trials illegal, unfair. And he died in the place of me and anyone from any race, any tribe, any language who will accept his sacrifice and his rule over their lives from then on. In other words, the death of Jesus restores you to God. You suddenly say, yes, I'm not a rebel anymore. Now I'm going to live under the governorship of God. But we still have a problem in an understanding. How did Jesus cover up our sin exactly? Because that's what atonement means. It means covering. Cover over something. It sounds as if it was swept under the carpet. The proverbial lazy maid sweeps, but she doesn't want to get the dustpan and so on, so she just lifts the carpet and sweeps everything under it. No, he's not just sweeping things under the carpet. Now you see it, now you don't. But sin isn't just something that can be swept away or ignored. God would be unjust if he just overlooked sin. He just said, look, it's not a problem. We'll just overlook it. People say that everybody goes to heaven. That's a current, very foolish theory, and there's books out. Love wins. God loves everyone so much he'd never send anyone to hell. And my answer is, well, this is nice. Because one day you can sit down in heaven and have a nice cup of tea with Hitler and Mao and Stalin and all those guys, because they're going to be there. How are they any worse than a person who kills one person? How are they any worse than anyone? Yeah, they had bigger results, but sin is sin is sin. There's not a big or a small. It's all rebellion against God. And it wasn't also as if he looked at Christ on the cross and thought, I was the one being punished. I know it says he had no comeliness that we should admire him and so on, and same here. But God isn't fooled. He didn't look at Jesus and mistake him for someone else. He knew exactly who he was. And it's not as if God lashed out in anger and caught Jesus instead of me. I remember when there was 5 kids in our family, and we'd squabble on the back seat of the car when we're driving somewhere because you get itchy and irritated and someone's on your side and so on. And my dad would just lean back and hit like that. And whoever got it, whether you were the guilty one or not. That's not what God did. He didn't just lash out and Jesus got the hit. This is what's written by Isaiah. We esteemed him smitten by God and afflicted. And that's what they thought at the crucifixion. God is punishing this man. Verse 6, the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Who laid it on him? The Lord did. Verse 10, it was the will of the Lord to crush him. And the atonement does indeed result in the innocent taking the full punishment of the guilty. Even when Jesus said, "What sin do you accuse me of?" no one could come up with anything. Then they had to get liars to come and lie about things he'd said. He'd never sinned once. Man, I think I started when I was a few days old. And I look back on my record. There's not a day goes by without something going wrong, thought, word, or deed. But it was all arranged. Not a spur of the moment thing. Not God saying, "Oh, now men have sinned, I'd better do something." No, this was planned ahead of time. It was a judicial element. God was not obliged to provide atonement. He could have just left every human being to die and go to hell. Or he could have just pulled the plug on the whole world, as he nearly did with the flood. He wasn't under any obligation. You see, the entire atonement, the entire paying for sin, was a collusion. It was God and Jesus getting together, the Father and the Son, right from the start of the problem, when the first man and first woman mistrusted God, almost called him a liar, and ate that fruit. God had already made a way. Genesis 3 verse 15, God says to the snake, "I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head," or crush your head, "and you shall bruise his heel." That's the first mention of the gospel ever, right after Adam and Eve sinned. There's a promise. The offspring of the woman, a human being, Jesus, is going to crush the head of Satan. The entire atonement was a collusion, a partnership between the Father and the Son. It wasn't a deception, it wasn't mistaken identity, or a case of anyone taking the punishment. It wasn't a miscarriage of judgment. It was God agreeing with himself. Remember, Jesus is God. So God agreed with himself that the dreadful stain of sin had to be dealt with. And God agreeing with himself how it would be done. And God agreeing with himself that he would be the sacrifice to take away sin. It wasn't a case of the Father making his Son go to the cross, pushing him to it, tricking him into it, but the Father and the Son together making a plan to redeem lost human beings because he counted them precious. And then, because Jesus was righteous, God counts those he redeems as righteous. And that's how the gospel works. It starts fitting together, but that's not the end. Have you taken advantage of the gospel? Now, we get special offers all the time. If you have TV, a special offer. And you get the newspapers in your mailbox. They've got all these color things in them, special offers. They just want you to spend money. But have you taken advantage of God's offer? Or the question comes to everyone, are you still a miserable rebel going your own way? Heading your own way to hell without reference to God? Well, verse 11 and 12, we read this. Out of the anguish of his soul he shall be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous. That means, even though we are still sinners, God counts us as righteous. And he says, therefore I will divide him a portion with the many, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul to death and was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he bore the sin of many and makes intercession for the transgressors. See what that means? First of all, you're still a sinner. But God, in effect, looks at you through the lens of Jesus and declares you righteous. Now, if you end up in court, you didn't pay your traffic fines, and the judge says you're guilty, and someone pays your fine for you, even though you're still guilty, he lets you go. You're counted as righteous. Even though you did nothing for yourself, you're then legally called righteous, justified. But not only that, he makes intercession for the transgressors. Think of that. You can be counted righteous before God because Jesus is righteous, and Jesus actually stands up in court, in the court of God, pleading for you. Jesus is praying for you. We know that from the Gospel of John. He says, I'm not just praying for these with me, but for those who will believe because of them. That's us in church. And that's how the gospel works for you. That's what Good Friday is about. Now you can laugh it off. Go home and eat Easter eggs and hot cross buns. Go to the beach. Not a good day for the beach. You can just go off. No problem. Or you can take advantage of the offer. You can be counted righteous, although you're still a sinner. You can be justified and not face the trial in the end. And you can have Jesus pray for you. If you haven't taken advantage, do it now. Come and see me. Come and see Paul when he's back. Talk to somebody. Take advantage of the offer because the time is ticking when there will be no more advantage. Amen.